So I was working as a reporter at the Observer in London, and there were all these stories about how the police were going to try and stop the convoy getting to Stonehenge. So I decided that the best way to cover it was to travel with the convoy, because if you don't get inside a story like that, the police try and lock you out. So I can't remember quite how I discovered, maybe through Don Aitken and people, that there was a bit of the convoy down at a place called Wick near Bristol. And I drove down there with a photographer on a Friday afternoon and talked to the people there, and they said that I could get in one of the buses with them and travel along with them that night. So I did.
We're prepared for any contingency which may arise, and although I've told you how many men I've got available, I've also got maximum cooperation of my neighbouring chief constables that they're prepared to assist me if I require that aid.
I wasn't aware of it at the time that it took place, but I later became aware that really the whole of the Wiltshire establishment had sat down to decide what to do about the convoy, and this involved various landowners and the county council and the police and their solicitors. And it was a question really for them that they didn't want these people coming into Wiltshire and occupying the area around Stonehenge, but there wasn't really a law that enabled them to keep the convoy out. So it was a question of taking advice to find some kind of legal cloak to throw around the operation which they wanted to launch. And so they came up with this business of the civil injunctions to justify all that then happened. And it seems to me still highly questionable whether what happened was really lawful. Yeah, we travelled up from Wick to the forest on that Friday night. It was dark by the time we got there, and I didn't really know where I was. But the first person I met as we came into the woods was Lord Cardigan. And he was standing there looking rather bewildered as all these people come crazing in from different directions. And then we settled there in the woods overnight, and I spent the night just wandering around talking to different people about what was going to happen the next day. And my feeling at that stage was that the police were highly likely to try to prevent the convoy getting to Stonehenge, and that it was highly likely there would be violence. And I was worried, I suppose, that people in the convoy didn't seem to be aware of this, and that they were really rather over-relaxed about the whole thing. And this was ironic because later on the police wanted to claim that the convoy was armed to the teeth, and that Stalemate Forest was the site of some kind of council of war at which a great strategy was being hammered out. It just wasn't like that. There were a lot of people playing guitars and sleeping. On that Saturday morning, the convoy started moving out of the forest, and I was travelling in a vehicle about 4 from the back. Behind the convoy there was a line of about 6 police vans travelling along, and the convoy was stopping and starting every time a vehicle broke down, you know the way it does. And at one point, a vehicle about, say, 8 from the end of the convoy broke down, and the rest of the convoy travelled forward without realising that its tail had been left behind. And after a few minutes, while they were fiddling around with the engine trying to get it going, a young boy came running back from the front vehicle in this rear portion towards the other vehicles in the convoy, shouting that the police were about to bust them and that they'd heard this on the police radio. And at that point, sure enough, officers on foot came running down both sides of the vehicles, shouting and leaning. And what they did in my vehicle was that they came up both sides, tore open the front doors, pulled the keys out of the ignition, and then pulled the driver out of the front of the vehicle. His wife or girlfriend, who was in the passenger seat, was also hauled out, and I was left in the back of this little van with their 2 children, who were aged about 8 and 10, who were extremely frightened. And it was rather sweet because the boy, I would say he was about 8 or 9 years old, started rummaging around in the kitchen cupboard at the back of this van and pulled out a little frying pan to defend himself against the police. And I said, just put it down, calm down. There was nothing he could do. He wanted to save his parents, who'd been dragged off screaming. And a few minutes later, policemen came back into the van to get us, and they came in with their sticks raised, and they were obviously highly agitated, and I was afraid that we were all going to get hit. So I made it very clear that we were not a threat to them, tried to calm them down. And we were taken out, and I was arrested for a minute or two, but I produced my press card and explained that I was an outsider watching. And so while everybody else from this portion was bundled into the vans and driven off, I was let go, and I then had to walk another mile or so to catch up with the rest of the convoy where they'd stopped.
Nothing precipitated this act by the police at the back?
No, the convoy was just driving along the road. They didn't do anything to specifically break the law or to provoke the arrest. It was simply that they were isolated from the rest of the convoy, so they were a vulnerable target. I know the police tried to make out at the trial that the convoy, these rear vehicles had been driven across the road as some kind of roadblock to cut off the police at the rear, which was bizarre because what actually happened was that the police themselves, having taken these vehicles over, drove them across the road because presumably they were frightened that the convoy might come back or something. But it wasn't the convoy drivers who moved the vehicles, it was the police who did it.
You know what? Will you just take care of him for a moment? We've got a broken arm. You come with me. Okay, you want to for a second. We'll have a look and see if we can take him together. Young lady, you want to sit in his home, but she won't come.
Won't she?
Yeah. Where she's gone.
The main thing that happened for hours and hours was that there was just this stalemate, this long wait. And most of the people who were among the travellers in the field were rather anxious because they could see they were surrounded by police.
You had no right to stop us coming in this field. We're not at Stonehenge. We're not breaking any laws. We're not at Stonehenge. You had no right to stop us coming here, and you've no right to sit out there blaming us for the damage.
One or two people tried to drive their vehicles out through the Beanfield and couldn't find a way out. So they were just stuck there and surrounded. And after a while, 2 or 3 people came across to me where I was standing on the fence between the Beanfield and the grass field and asked me if I would help them to negotiate with the police because the police wouldn't talk to them. So it's a little bit of a problem for a reporter because you're supposed not to get involved in the story you're covering, but on the other hand it seemed crazy not to help if I could. So I went into the field and across the other side and started to kind of liaise between the travellers and the police. And for 2 or 3 hours, really, we were putting up various suggestions of compromise, and the officers on the ground there would go away and check with headquarters and come back and reject them. So, for example, at one stage, the travellers said that they would simply abandon the idea of going to Stonehenge and leave, and the police came back and said, no, that's no good. So then they suggested, well, we'll not only leave, we'll head north out of Wiltshire under police escort. And the answer came back, no, that's not good enough. So he said, well, head north as far as you like. You can escort us to Newcastle if you want to. We'll just, reverse out of here and go wherever you want. And the answer came back, no, that's not good enough. And eventually, this dreadful man, Lionel Grundy, who was then the Assistant Chief Constable, arrived on the scene and made it quite clear that there were to be no negotiations and that everybody in the field was to be what he called arrested and processed.
Those of you that come out under those circumstances will be interviewed and dealt with.
In other words, you'll be locked up and dealt with. Yeah.
If I suspect that you've been involved in some of the offences that have occurred today, then you would be arrested. Well, that's it. Now, wait a minute. I'm not here to bargain with you. I'm here to say something to you for you to consider. Now, you don't have to make an answer now. You can get through to me.
We want to go to Stonehenge.
Well, the Stonehenge Festival, as you know, has been cancelled this year.
And somebody, it wasn't me, said, well, that's crazy. If you had a couple of football hooligans in a football stadium, you wouldn't arrest everybody in the stadium just to get at the hooligans. But he wasn't interested in making any distinction between those he alleged had actually committed offences and the rest. He wanted everybody. And the way it actually finished up with the negotiations with him was that he gave the convoy half an hour to think about it. And we were supposed to go back and say whether we were just going to surrender. And some 10 or 15 minutes had passed and the police started buckling up their helmets and picking up their shields to come into the field so that the half-hour time period was never permitted. Yeah, and there's 2 different interpretations on it. I mean, the most lawful one would be that the police genuinely believed that the travellers had committed offences and all had to be arrested. The other, which I was picking up from the kind of foot soldier policemen, was that they were extremely angry with the convoy. They'd had enough of them over the years, and that this was their chance to get in there and crack some heads. And that was something that policemen were saying explicitly. One officer warned me to stay out of the field. He said, my lads have been putting up with this lot for 11 years. They've had enough of it, and there's going to be some heads cracked in there today. On the whole, the police tactic was that if it was moving, they were going to hit it. Anything that moved, they went in on. The nearest thing to a specific target they developed was the raster bus, which was bigger and faster than any other vehicle and remained free right at the end of the battle. And there, the raster bus had provoked the police simply by refusing to be arrested, refusing to be stopped. And so when it finally did slew into another vehicle and come to a halt, every officer in the field, it seemed to me, came crowding in on it, and they were like kind of flies around rotten meat. And there was no question of trying to make a lawful arrest or anything else. They just crawled all over that vehicle with truncheons flailing, hitting anybody they could reach. It was extremely violent and very sickening. And I've still got this very, very clear picture of some particular guy who was about 18 years old wearing a brown kind of bomber jacket, trying to climb out of the window to escape the police violence, and kind of sinking slowly down onto this sea of policemen with their sticks beating him. And I saw his tooth chip as he went down. He was going, "Oh no." And it's really clear, that picture. And he was not attacking the police. He wasn't armed. He wasn't able to do them any damage at all. He was simply trying to get away from them, and they beat the dirt out of him. In fact, there was a senior officer came up, said, "Come on lads, calm down, don't give the press a field day," because he could see us there.
See what they're doing to us!
And it was at that point that my photographer, who was trying to take pictures of it, got arrested. And I myself got threatened and told to leave. This was the most undisciplined police operation I've ever seen. And I have quite often been in riot, and I have occasionally seen individual police officers blow it, but I've never seen an entire police operation run riot like that. It wasn't a matter of law enforcement, it was a collective act of bullying. And it really shocked me to see it. It really upset me personally, as well as making me feel outraged as a kind of voter and a taxpayer that policemen I pay for could behave like that.
2 petrol bombs have been thrown from the field over onto the police vehicles. They weren't lit, but the police are warning that if a match is dropped on the road, all the vehicles will go up in flames.
The mass media is a joke, generally, and particularly where the travellers are concerned. There's 2 factors that work. One is that individually, reporters are scared of the convoy. They're afraid they're going to get mashed up or raped if they go close to them. So you've got ignorance. And the second thing is that on the face of it, the convoy looked like a good story, you see. What makes them a good story is that they fit a kind of cliche from Hollywood. They're crazed hippies. And if you put the ignorance and the cliche together, you stick with the cliche, you see, because you don't go close enough to them to discover they're not crazed hippies. But it makes good copy. And on the particular occasion of the battle in the Beanfield, so-called, that the police told them to stay down the bottom of the hill, out of the field, and the reporters agreed, which was crazy. The police had no legal right to keep the reporters out of the field, but they allowed themselves to be herded like sheep away from the field so that they didn't see what went on. So then when the police came down the hill afterwards and gave them a lot of complete guff that fitted into the cliche image of the crazed hippies, they bought it. And the next day, what the police didn't tell them, they invented for themselves. And you've got all this stuff about petrol bombs being thrown, which just didn't happen. It's a fiction, but it all goes to shape public opinion. And it's actually, in a way, you look at them and they're just a joke, but it becomes a pretty dangerous joke when prospective jurors and voters and people who should be angry about what happened get fed this kind of nonsense.
There's been mention of a character called Les Vaughan. I mean,
Yeah.
what was his involvement with the serving of those injunctions?
Well, you have to understand, Les Vaughan is a fascist, and that's not just a rude word that you throw at somebody. I mean, he is a leading member of an extremely heavy, well-organised, covert fascist group in this country, and that's his politics, and that's been his life. And he was working at this time as a private investigator of a rather lowly type in Salisbury. And one of the jobs that he had was that he worked as a paper server on the firm of solicitors who were hired by the county council. And therefore he became involved in, first off, the business of gathering the names of individuals in the convoy upon whom these injunctions could then be served. And secondly, and illegally, he was, it seems, trying to set the convoy up in some way, in that a number of people that I spoke to made signed statements to the effect that Vaughan had been trying to give them weapons. And I published that story in the Observer, and Vaughan complained about it and said it was untrue. But the legal action which he launched to sue us collapsed at an early stage, and it's my honest opinion that Vaughan was trying to get arms to the convoy so that it would then justify the police violence. One of the big lies at the bottom of all this is that the people of Wiltshire didn't like the convoy. That isn't true in my experience. My family live in Wiltshire and did not want the police chasing these people out of the county. It isn't even true of the people who live closer to Stonehenge. Like on that Saturday as we were driving to the Stones, people were not hiding in their houses in fear. They weren't throwing rocks at the convoy to get them out of Wiltshire. They were waving.
What do you think of the verdict?
But the Winchester case, it's difficult for me to say because I wasn't sitting through it. But if you just look at if you get away from all the fine detail of the legal argument and exactly who said what to who in court, and get to the bottom line, what happened in the Beanfield was an outrage. It should not have happened in a civilized society. And the people who did it, that's to say the police, appear largely to have got away with it. And so that's wrong.